Hello and welcome to the CISO webinar, Data Leaks, Not Hacks, Are the Fastest Way to Sync a Brand. My name is Julia Boyle with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to thank Namogoo for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Namogoo. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleCIO. You can also follow us on Twitter at ArgyleExecForum and be sure to join our LinkedIn group, Chief Information Officer, CIO Forum. I also want to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate your members' support of this policy. We have an upcoming CIO-CISO leadership forum that may be of interest to you. A few highlights: March 11th in Chicago, Illinois, March 19th in San Francisco, California, and May 5th and 6th in New York. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up during today's event into the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Ohad Greenshpan, co-founder and CTO of Namogoo. We are pleased to have Ohad with us to deliver opening remarks. Welcome, Ohad. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. So happy to be here. Today's discussion will be on data leaks that happen online. The topic of the discussion, while being part of security and privacy, is obviously relevant for any company that runs any kind of business online, which is practically any company these days. And in terms of the personas or the people that are relevant for this kind of topic, is not only the CIOs and the CISOs of the world, but also any executive that deals with the digital and the marketing aspects of websites these days. The topic is relatively new. Namogoo is a pioneering player in the space, and I will mention relevant aspects as we go along in the presentation. Can you see the second slide? Just to make sure that that you see me switching to the next slide. Anyone?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, by the way, let's keep it as an open discussion. The session will be most successful if we have it as an interactive one. So feel free to ask any question either on the team chat panel on the side, or just ask out loud, and we can discuss the topics. So a bit about Namogoo. So Namogoo was born 5 years ago in August 2014. Have over 100 employees with offices in Israel, Boston, and London. We work today with the biggest retailers in the market, both in the United States and North America, South America and Latin America, and also Europe. I'll mention some of the names here. So Namogoo is currently running on all the page views that are served by some of the companies that you see in this slide, and many more, covering actually any kind of company that runs business online, whether it's retailers, e-commerce companies, marketplaces, travel companies, insurance and fintech companies. Namogoo runs as a JavaScript code on each and every customer journey that these companies mentioned here serve to the world globally. About 15 billion page views a week covered by Namogoo these days. Namogoo, a few years back, established a new market category, being a very active and pioneering player on the client-side space, protecting e-commerce retail companies and fintech companies against a phenomenon that's called the customer journey hijacking, a phenomenon that starts from code running on the end user's device, either from the end user's browser or a device or network, taking control on the customer journey and actually manipulating and controlling what the customer sees or how he or she interacts with the customer journey. Now expanding to additional areas such as privacy, a topic that we will discuss today. When we look at the customer journey, we look at what are the factors that actually impact or can impact the customer journey. And in terms of code, if you look at all the code running on the page views that such a company serves to the world or to the end user, most of the majority of the code running there is not owned and is not managed by the company that actually is the owner of the site. So about 53% of the code running on all these page views, running on the customer journey, is either code that is owned by a third party that the company engaged with, or a fourth party that comes with a third party, or a fifth party, or a sixth party, etc., etc., or code running from the client-side script coming from the end user's device. For example, an add-on, a customer, an end user plugin or toolbar, or some code that comes from the network through which the user browses. What we will discuss today focuses mostly on the 53%, although I will touch on a few points that are relevant for mistakes or issues that might come from the 47%. This topic will discuss how issues that happen on the end user side can then leak to either third party, fourth party, or even client-side scripts that are beyond the control of the company, again, running the website. Namogoo's a client-side platform and product. So as mentioned, Namogoo provides visibility and analytics and control on all the code that is running on the site, whether it's a first party or third party or client-side script, all the way to the end user's browser, or throughout the life cycle of the end user's browsing. By that, extending the security and privacy mechanisms that the company might have, both on the server side or on the cloud. So obviously, if everything is secure on the server side or on the cloud, when a page is served to the end user and the end user's device is not secure there, and code is served on the fly when the user browses the site, issues might come up later on. So Namogoo provides this kind of visibility and control on the end user's side as well. Data leakage. So what we will discuss today is I will give examples for three real-world examples that we addressed in the past or are addressing on a daily basis. One of them, or the first one, will discuss how data can accidentally leak to third and fourth party vendors by, for example, a mistake, an issue that happened in the holiday season. I'll give a real world example. Happened to one of the biggest retailers in the US today during the holiday season of 2018. What was the solution that helped this retailer overcome this problem. So accidental leak of customer data and user data on the client side is the first topic. The second topic is how third and fourth party vendors can collect data more than they should or more than they are allowed, and what are the implications of it. And the last one is how third and fourth party vendors running on the site can be hacked and serve as a vector to leak data. So before going through the examples, I want to touch on the magnitude of the chaos, magnitude of the problem. So obviously, something that happens on the website, on the client side, can leak to third-party vendors. Actually can leak also to end users' scripts running on the device, add-ons, toolbars, password savers, etc., etc. But it can leak also to third parties as well. From the third parties, it can leak to fourth parties because they interact with each other. Beyond that, obviously, once data leaks on the website, the data goes back to the database, to the company's servers and database and storage and cloud, and from there on, it can leak to any other vendor that runs on the infrastructure as well. So something that might start as an issue, as a small issue on the client side, can leak to many vendors, either running on the website or on the end user's device, or running on the company's backend and infrastructure later on. So many kinds of problems can start or when something like that happens on the client side. And we will discuss some of the issues. Any question until now, or shall we go to the examples? Okay, so the first example will demonstrate how data can leak on the end user side to third and fourth party vendors running on the site. So I think because we don't have too much time, I will just start with the example itself. Obviously, we anonymized the retailer's name, brand, but as I mentioned, the example is a real-world example that actually happened a bit more than a year ago. So during the holiday season of 2018, one of our clients actually came to us and said they might have had a problem they saw on one of the engineers' computers. In this incident, they actually saw the credit card data appearing on the URL, on the site URL, open text. So in the URL, as you can see in the example here, they could see like credit card equals 4580, etc., etc. Obviously, the page hasn't been served like that. Obviously, a page URL is not supposed to contain such data. What happened there is some event hasn't been caught correctly on the client side, and credit card data of end users leaked from the checkout form to the URL. The client's fear was that not that the end user could see it, obviously the end user could see it in that case, but that all the third and fourth party vendors running on the page, on the checkout page, and the rest of the customer journey, all these vendors were suddenly exposed to credit card data that they were not supposed to be exposed to because of a mistake. Many of these vendors, by the way, are not even PCI compliant. Many of these vendors are fourth parties and are not even engaged with the site. And the major problem here was that this client even did not know who are the vendors that are actually running on the site. And this was just a mistake. The law in the US, in this case, enforces companies to report on such incident of data leakage of the credit card to all the end users that their data leaked. And also, you need to report an incident like this to the authorities. Obviously, might have a significant impact on the company's business. Not talking about the holiday season, which is the most critical time of the year in terms of sales. So you have to report on such incident unless you have a good enough solution that allows you to see and to mitigate the situation in some manner. What you need to do in such case, you need to be able to detect when such client-side leakage actually happens, and you need to know who are the vendors that run on the website that might be exposed to such an issue. And also, you would like to be a bit more smarter than that and actually know who are the vendors that did not ran, but also ran there and also sent the URL backwards, because these vendors now become the vector of data leakage on your site. So this is the first example that, again, starts from a mistake. The second example talks about how data, sensitive data of customers can be collected by third and fourth party vendors more than the third and fourth party vendors should collect. So obviously, many vendors run on the site. The average number today says that in businesses that run their business online deploy between 70 to 80 vendors on site, whether third party or fourth party. And actually, any vendor collects data in order to operate. So obviously, any vendor should have its engagement with the company should declare what is the data that it collects, and obviously, in order to protect the end user's privacy, it cannot collect any sensitive data on the end users. That's great in theory, but actually in practice, it's the wild west, right? So companies can change their code on an ongoing basis. On one day they can collect one type of data, another day they can change and start collecting additional data. Because these vendors are running on the client side, it's very easy to change the policy on a daily basis. Most of the vendors today running on the digital space are cloud-based, so it's very easy to change the way the code behaves, and it's very difficult to track what each and every vendor is collecting, and to cover the 100% of the end users in terms of the data collection. What you see here in this slide is an example for vendors running along the customer journey. Obviously, these days, each and every department in the organization deploys its own services, whether it's services related to ads or marketing or fraud or IT or security or digital, running A/B tests. They're deploying tags on the site. And data that leaks on one part of the journey can continue to additional parts of the journey, because the browser has, and any device actually has, its own storage. So data that has been collected on one section can continue to another section and become a problem in additional sections, even beyond where it started. This slide shows that vendors might collect one type of data on one geography and different kind of data on another geography, making it, again, hard to track. Obviously, each and every geography, each and every country has its own privacy rules. So you need to be able to at least know what is collected in order to know that your privacy engagement with your customers might be at risk. The next slide shows how a vendor, a specific vendor might collect, and this is a real example, of course, anonymous, can collect one type of data on one site and different kind of data on another site. Again, these vendors code is changing on a daily basis based on the goals that each and every vendor has in order to run appropriately. So this is the second topic, how data can leak by third and fourth party vendors collecting data on customers. The last topic deals with how third and fourth party vendors are now becoming a vector of attack to take data out of the site. Again, we discussed how it's hard to monitor what's going on 100% of the population, 100% of the customer journeys. So we see a trend these days, instead of hackers trying to break into the company's servers, they attack third and fourth party vendors running on the site and starting to leak data from them to the hackers' servers. I will give an example. Maybe the most well-known category for this kind of phenomenon is known as MageCart attack, attacking a third and fourth party vendors running on the site. There's a very well-known issue that happened on the British Airways, also on Best Buy, Macy's, Ticketmaster, also on Newegg. There is a very famous example of how a hacker acquired a domain called neweggStats.com, attacking a service, and then started to leak data, customer data, credit card data out of the site to a new destination called neweggStats.com, again, making it very hard for any kind of monitoring system to see and also to understand this is an abnormal behavior. What can you do to prevent data leakage? So we described here, obviously any company can have its own steps, but we mention here 6 steps that we see as essential to make sure that your online site is compliant. So the first one is to map all the third and fourth party vendors or services running on the site to make sure that you don't have any kind of service that runs there and is not supposed to run, or to make sure that that vendors and services run appropriately where they should. For example, that you don't have on the checkout service that shouldn't run on the checkout. By the way, we have many examples for that. We can continue offline. The discussion. Step number 2 is to remove any suspicious tag or domain, any tag or service or vendor that behaves differently, that might have some abnormal behavior on the site. Step number 3 is to manage the service contracts to make sure that you know each and every service running on the site, what it collects, what it should collect, and what it collects in practice. Step number 4, a continuous audit of all the third and fourth party vendors running on the site. We see many examples of engagement with the vendors that when you start the engagement, you do like a very serious audit, you do an A/B test, you explore the service, you examine it very well. But after it goes into production, you forget about it, you continue to do your next project, and then this is where the most of the problems start. Step number 5, so we need like continuous audit on an ongoing basis on all the services running. Step number 5, contact third-party vendors or fourth party through the third-party vendors, collecting data that they shouldn't. And step number 6 is to detect any unauthorized behavior that shouldn't be there according to what you know as the routine or as the expected. Time is up, so any questions, feel free, and I'll hand it over to the moderator to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Ohad. As a reminder to all of our listeners, please submit any questions you have in the Q&A interface, and following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. We'll now kick off our panel discussion titled, Data Leaks, Not Hacks, Are the Fastest Way to Sink a Brand. Today's discussion will also be moderated by Ohad. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So we have a great panel today. Before we start with the questions, so please feel free to introduce yourself. Please describe who you are, what is your role and responsibility in our organization, and then we'll continue to the questions.
Sure, Ohad. Great presentation, by the way. This is Partha Chakraborty. I'll just go first in the order in the presentation it is being showed. So currently I am working as the Director of Network, Infrastructure and Cloud Security, Architecture and Engineering Services for Bank of Montreal. It is a global operation extending from Canada to entire North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific as well. I have been overall in the cybersecurity industry for 23 years, mostly in Wall Street financials or U.S. financial services insurance companies like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Guardian Life, and happy to be part of the panel today.
Great. Happy to have you on board. Anna?
Yes. I'm Anna Colocho, Senior Security Architect at Chevron Corporation. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years, broad spectrum of technologies. My current focus is data security, data loss prevention program, launched here at our organization. Look at a broad perspective of methods of applying data protection, looking at the various types of information that we have, structure, unstructured, big data, but primary focus is really on the data protection side.
Great. Happy to have you on board. Steve?
I'm Steve Doyle. Got 20 plus years in cyber security technology. I started out in the telecom industry, working on networking and securing the network. Among other things, developed a good 20 years ago the first enterprise-wide single sign-on, large-scale single sign-on system. This enhanced security by taking the ownership of authentication away from every single system and subsystem and every single administrator and putting it into one basket so you could watch that basket well. And if somebody went rogue, you could turn off all their access in one fell swoop. Today, the telecom industry and the network industry I've been involved in has kind of merged with media. We've gone from strictly being transporting data to actually, storing the data, owning it, creating it, and most significantly, trying to figure out how to monetize it. This industry trend change has increased the overall attack surface that I'm dealing with, and has proven to make it clear that data security, specifically personal data security, is a growing risk and concern, and one that we're looking to identify and further remediate. Because as we said in the very name of this topic, losing your customers, your vendors' data, their personal data, will tarnish your brand tremendously, and we are just starting to address the increasing risks we're seeing with industry consolidation and with just the direction of industry. The only other thing I wanted to mention was to everybody, happy International Data Privacy Day. I didn't make that up. It really is such a day. Congress has approved it and things like that. But this marks the anniversary of the first international agreement on individuals' data privacy rights. And with that, as we move on to the next person.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Satyam Priyadarshy. I'm the Technology Fellow and the Chief Data Scientist at Halliburton currently, as well as the Senior Fellow of International Cyber Center, where I actually work on R&D side of how artificial intelligence and machine learning can be used for cybersecurity challenges. And my experience goes back to days of AOL since 1999, when we were implementing various cybersecurity tools and technologies to protect all the websites, which Ohad was talking about earlier. All those challenges existed, but now the challenges have become bigger and bigger. I've done a lot of AI-related things for DDoS attacks in the past. And with that, how these things can be now taken to other industries, whether it's healthcare or oil and gas or energy sector, especially in the days of IoT and digital ecosystems, that remains open topics.
Great. So why don't we start with the points for discussion? So we have a few topics today, and I hope we can reach them all, but if not, we'll stop when time is up. We will start with privacy risks. So I would like to ask the panelists, what are the biggest privacy risks associated with your digital ecosystem? Tell us some of about your experience in real life.
This is Partha, right? Probably I will kick off and let my fellow panelists also to add their point of view. So I don't think the privacy risks in general we are talking about after going down the digital transformation route, which is mostly cloud and cloud-native applications and the hosted services, are different than what was in on-prem. The question is, has the complexity increased? Has the opportunities of incidents happening has increased? And has the overall number of incidents increased? Yes. The reason being, like, there are two basic types of those incidents. One is definitely an intended one, right? There is an actor behind it, and there is an overall effort to create an incident which can cause a privacy breach. And there will be the other category of like unintentional, right, kind of thing, which people don't even know the controls are there, and eventually, finally, these are detected. Now, these two categories fall when your data stays on-prem, where you also have the vendors come in, provide support, or your service providers remotely monitoring your equipment and providing 24/7 support. So they also have access, a proper segregation of duty, making sure people don't have access to whatever they don't need more than for doing their job. Those things are in place. But when we go down the digital journey and host it to providers like AWS or any other maybe hybrid cloud providers, then the chances of those incidents happening increases because there are way many touch points, multiple players are involved. And also, considering it's a shared tenant services, there is also some risk which on and off comes on, and eventually those are also passed by the service provider. But in a nutshell, the risks which we deal with when we keep our data in our data center as opposed to in our digital journey with digital assets and digital transformation, those are increasing because of several touch points, multi-tenancy, multiple operators, vendors, and the data is being exposed, which is beyond our control, that can overall impact our privacy. So that's what I would like to say, and over to my fellow panelists if they want to add something.
Yes, this is Anna Colocho. Yes, definitely. Data is created on a day-to-day basis, right? And we create data to consume it. And as consumers, we have to expose it. All right. As creators, we have to expose it as part of creating data. It would not be usable if we protected it too much and would not allow it to be used, right? But how do we mitigate the privacy risks, right? We need to identify the information and understand the sensitivity of the information that's handled by the organization's processes, right? We touch on a few points right now. We talk about people, people being either the consumers or the creators of information. We have processes, our governing policies that we create, the processes on how we process information internally, and then we have technology, right? Technology is either the technology that allows us to protect that information. So we need to think of it cohesively. So as we apply information protection, we are able to address those privacy risks. A strong data governance policy program in your organization is going to provide those guidelines to those that are creating consumer information, and also those that implement technology that understand what we're trying to achieve when it comes to protecting the information, right? So that strong governance and policy program is definitely important. Another point is that as we handle and create data, not all information is equal, right? So we may or may not want to apply the same rigor of controls to all the information that we have. But understanding the information that we're trying to control and protect that information, right, will allow us to apply the correct parameters to prevent exposure of data privacy.
Steve, if I can just reemphasize something that I think was said there, but maybe summarize just one point. As we go in technology industry from people owning their own data to putting them in, quote, a best-in-class provider of data storage and management, it is critical that the steps you would take when you owned it, you do prior to turning it over to someone else, specifically data identification, classification, access controls. All that has to be worked out in detail before you hand a large quantity or any quantity of data over to one of the cloud providers. And the idea that sometimes I find them says, management sometimes looks at the cost of their own data center and said, we get rid of all of them next year, we'll farm them out to this particular vendor. If your data was well managed prior to that, you probably could do it in a fairly short period of time. Bottom line is you need a full governance audit of what you have before you turn anything over, or you'll turn something over that you didn't know that you turned over, or maybe you didn't even know you had. It's really important that you be on top of your data governance before you move to the cloud.
So I think there are two aspects to this data privacy, especially in the industrial settings, that are important. One is, yes, the data governance at the organizational level or industry level has to take place, but I think also the regulatory authorities have to also come up with better models of data privacy. Of course, for PII data, we know that there is a lot of work being done and being established now, and everybody is trying to follow that. But when it comes to digital assets, especially using IoTs and all, there are not much of regulatory framework around it. And I think that will be something to look for future.
Yes, agree with all the points mentioned, and obviously following I think Partha's comment on whether it's on-prem or cloud, when things go digital, it goes beyond where we as enterprises store the data. It runs on the end user's device, so data will be stored on many devices beyond things that we can do as enterprises to protect it, and again, many kinds of risks start there.
It's definitely
for the second question,
right?
Yeah.
I said it's definitely a paradigm shift, right? We've experienced through the years where we apply protection controls at the endpoint, right? But now data becomes our endpoint, right? We follow the data, we protect the data based on the sensitivity of the information.
Exactly. So the second question is, in what ways do you map the digital assets embedded into your site? If there are any, what types of such services? How do you map them? Whether it's manually, whether you have any like automatic mechanisms to do it? How do you monitor all this?
Again, I'll just add 2 points. Like whatever I have seen, this is one of not the easy things for any industry. Right? Knowing your data, knowing your asset, if you know it, more than half of the battle is done, right? So where your data is, what type of data is, what type of asset it is, and then you figure it out, right? How good or bad the control is. So first thing is that a disclaimer. I'm not talking about my current company or previous companies, industry as a general, as we all have seen like for quite some time. Every company we have seen, right, try to put together some process, some governance process, and also an SDLC lifecycle. That when your application goes live, you have to go through some gating process, and part of the gating process, you have to define your data. And when you define your data, you have a policy book or handbook or data definition library, which says whether the data has any sensitive information, right, or what is the classification of the data. So usually, those are the things which every company goes through whenever any application is moving to cloud. Now, the question becomes about the legacy applications, right, where those kind of classifications were done, predating a lot of people, and a lot of dependency with other information where people don't even know, right, or we don't even know whether the right process was followed or anything which bypassed those processes. Bottom line, the information which is stored, pretty much most of the companies have some sort of a definition, inventory in different form, where the application, data mapping, and classification is there. Whether it is accurate or not, that becomes a bigger problem, right? So in that case, yes, there are a lot of tools, and mostly these days based on AI, right, where you do a discovery and try to map out and see where the data is, what kind of classification it should fall into. Now, are those 100% accurate? I mean, obviously not. I mean, there are a lot of false positives also coming up where people need to do an investigation. But the combination of those governance processes where any application going in production, you have to define, have an inventory, have the gating, sign off, and the automated process, right? So with machine intelligence, that actually helps in identifying and classifying the data, and more to it, to identify whether the controls are adequate or controls are lacking so that people can take action on it. Now, none of these processes are like, or technologies are foolproof, but at least it's a starting point. But we have to understand doing 100% perfect job in this space is extremely difficult. So whatever we can do with the combination of enhancing process, tuning our AI tools, is always the right step towards, classifying the data. And once we can classify the data and discover our data, we are better protecting our data because we have way more control than without knowing where our data is residing or what type of data is there. That's all I wanted to say.
Agreed. And also, even if something happens, as you mentioned, it's very hard to have 100% coverage. Even something happens today even on a small scale, behind every incident, there's at the end of the day a customer. Its data could have been exposed. So behind any incident, there's a person. That this data is very important for him or for her. So yeah. Any other panelists? Any other comments on that?
Yeah. So if you look at the digital assets or assets within the digital ecosystem, data is number one, and of course then Partha was talking about AI algorithms and all, they themselves, these algorithms or models, they themselves become digital assets. And one of the things that is missing currently is like how do we do the provenance of the data as well as these models before they are deployed and what needs to be done. So provenance is a one important part besides the cataloging of the data, and then as Partha was saying, clustering and things like that of data for the right reasons. And then of course the hardware side through all the supply chain process, everything needs to be actually cataloged for the complete digital ecosystems. And then of course how these models have done in the past and how are they being modified, how do we track them, what's the life cycle of it. Those are all parts of digital ecosystem.
Right. So from your experience asking the panel, most of the monitoring solutions these days, from what you know, are focused on when a new version is deployed to the site, or are there any tools you're familiar with that monitor the data assets or the digital assets on the site on an ongoing basis, detecting any anomalies in behavior, etc., etc.?
So I don't think there are one tool or one solution that is needed, right? It depends on which kind of problems we are talking about and which areas we are talking about. And especially if we talk about energy sector or the oil and gas sector, there are multiple aspects to the digital ecosystem. One is the field area, the one in the back office, also defined as IT and OT side of the world. I think in order to train the next generation workforce, people have to look for solutions, and I don't think there's a one solution fit all for these kind of tracking data or digital assets right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's there's emerging threats, right, that target specific data, and data it's handled at different layers, at different levels, right? So thinking that there's one single solution to protect our information, it's definitely not the right thinking. There's an ecosystem, as mentioned, right? Data protection ecosystem that we have to look at, and identity and access management is a foundational element of data protection, right? You have to have a very good program in identity access management to be able to grant access to the information, along with so you can implement a very strong ecosystem of data loss prevention technologies. There is not a single vendor, as mentioned, that's going to help us achieve data protection. Today, what I see in the different various vendors that I talk to, everybody has their own methodology on how they implement protection, and they're very focused on a specific area, right? But in order for me as an architect, right, for me to achieve a cohesive architecture for data leakage, I require interoperability with the system, so I can have a systematic approach on how I implement data protection across an enterprise, right? So that's really what I look at is how do we achieve that as an industry? How do we look at data protection? How do we implement standards out there that will help us achieve the data protection ecosystem across the various types of technologies that we have and the different types of information that are out there?
And also, like, there are a lot of legal and the regulatory side of it, right, where, we definitely have tools, right? Whenever we put data in the cloud, we do our compliance scans, right? Not from a organizational policy compliance perspective that, yes, if you have operating system A, you need to have PAST, you cannot have X, Y, and Z. Those are definitely there. But from a legal and privacy perspective, there are tons of regulations in place, right? We keep doing scans, we keep finding scans, and those your regulations and policies are also constantly evolving, and vendors do a good job of coming up with solutions and keeping it updated, right? There are so many jurisdictions based on the country and the industry and all, like how to keep those tools in sync with, right, with all the compliance and the regulatory aspects of it, so that whenever we keep our digital asset and use those tools to scan, identify, and discover whether we are in a violation of any particular regulation or not, we are protected. Because humanly, right, whenever somebody talks about, I mean, we only remember a handful of regulations, right? I mean, maybe GDPR, right, like 6 or 7 core principles, right, or maybe upcoming privacy, California, right, or New York, or anything. But the tools have to, the vendor community has to help coming up with more agile ways of ingesting those regulations and keeping it most updated, so that as a consumer, right, of those tools when we are using it, we can be assured of that we are doing the right job, right, that we will not get hit by any regulatory incident where our tool said that we were good and eventually we did not know that. So that's another side where it's also a constant challenge. And again, technology is coming into picture to help us out, because humanly and doing it manually is just impossible.
Great. So maybe the last topic we'll discuss, maybe we'll have time for one more, is about what is, from your experience, the biggest benefit of a digital solution that prevents data leakage. And we can look at the title of the discussion. Obviously, from looking at it, you can see that it is relevant both for privacy executives dealing with the data in the organization, hacking, relevant for security, and also we mentioned the brand. So obviously, any executive that deals with how the brand is perceived, obviously customers these days want to shop online or to go online in a place where they feel safe. So from your experience, what is the main benefit of having a solution that prevents data leakage, whether it's the legal people in the organization, or security, or privacy, or digital, or marketing, or a combination of those? If you have heard and can share some examples, that would be great.
Definitely hit them all, right? But the biggest achievement from an operating standpoint of view is automation, right? A proactive approach of protecting the information that is systematic, that is well understood, right? So that's definitely a huge benefit. And the result of that is really achieving consumer trust, right? Is protecting that brand. And consumers knowing that you have a program that your top priority is to protect their privacy, they will trust you, they will do business with, right? So the other point is, organizations can achieve the data privacy compliance with all the regulations that are being enacted today, right? So we can achieve those in a proactive way.
Great, thanks, Anna.
So I think, we have to look at these things a little bit beyond consumer. In the consumer space, a lot of work is being done. And the good part is that now that, as Ohad's your slide was showing, that there are a lot of third party, four parties, 5 parties on a given website, certainly a lot more data is generated. So that makes a good case for leveraging artificial intelligence algorithms to actually mitigate the risk as well. So when you have large scale data, you actually can build more precise models to track down any anomalies and things like that. Back in 20 years back, it was not that much easier because you had spotty data, but now today you can look at the flow of the data in real time. You can look at building what anomalies are there, and those can help us build those privacy and leakage issues even much better and much in real time. But the second challenge, that industrial side of it, that we bigger industries, and especially critical infrastructure industries, are interested in is how the data leakage from, say, industrial IoT devices will take place, and then how do we mitigate that? And that's where I think again these big data technologies are going to play a lot of role in it.
I mean, I can't agree more, right? I mean, is there any other option other than relying on big data, AI and all, right? I don't think we have any. The consumption of data, as we know, like more than exponentially increasing. So it's just humanly not possible to define a policy-based rule to protect our data leakage. I remember like 10 or 15 years ago when we were trying to protect organizations' asset, we could write some regular expression rule, right? If this is it, then it matches sort of a credit card, sort of as a number, right? Then protect it, right? Or maybe an exact data pattern match, maybe a hash value, right? Maybe indicators of leakage was through, bytes in or bytes out, right? But those were like very preliminary kind of thing. And now as things are advancing, and again, the great point, right? As Satyam added, right, on the industrial side, eventually those are also endpoint. There are also the same principles, right? The thing is that the operating systems were used to write those devices were not security aware at that point of time. So right now, patching those devices could not be possible, but maybe have an external touch point or choke point through which all the data communication is going on, and having visibility over there to ensure nothing leaks out, but without looking into or leveraging AI more and more and having the confidence and making it better, more predictable and accurate, I don't think we have any other way in future to tackle this battle, be it data protection, be it privacy, be it third-party, fourth-party risk, be it InfoSec. It's pretty much everywhere. Right? No single AI, no single tool in cyber right now comes up where it does not have a marketing code as AI and ML, right? So, which truly in the sense, I mean, people might not be using to the fullest extent, but the days are coming as we are more approaching. I mean, that's the only way we can probably solve our problem, be it good guys who are trying to protect or be it bad guys who are trying to break it out. It's a battle of whose algorithm will be stronger and who can implement and who can be more aware and who can have more agility in implementation and who can have more advanced controls in implementation to protect and prevent.
I'm going to mention one technology thing as we try and to automate and deep learn and other such things around the expanding data. One of the critical things that came out of really the turn of the millennium in terms of protecting digital assets was the concept that data has to be encrypted at rest and has to be encrypted in transport. The only point it's supposed to be decrypted is when we have an authenticated and authorized person reading, editing, or whatever. So just at these limited moments, we would have a risk of a very compartmentalized risk of a data leak. Now, that will help a lot and has helped quite a bit when we consider the days of a laptop being left in a taxi cab or something like that. We had a string of those, if people remembered, well over a decade ago, and that was solved by encryption. But when we go to some of these artificial intelligence approaches, we're going to be looking at not analyzing the data as much as analyzing the metadata, how it's handled, where it's transported, the quantity of it. Those kinds of signatures might not be recognizable to the human eye as a suspicious activity, but that's where deep learning could potentially give us a chance to recognize things that you and I would not see as suspicious, but we could learn through examples, because deep learning has to be taught. Artificial intelligence has to have a data set to work against, but could be taught to recognize. And that is one of the challenges that I think is not fully developed yet, exploited yet to take advantage of. But bottom line is, I don't want to see encryption being backed off of here at this point.
Agreed. Totally agree. So I think time is up. So I would like first to thank the forum, the panelists for investing the time, and also to thank all our attendees for investing the time to hear this webinar. Any concluding remarks?
Thank you, Ohad, and our panelists for doing a great job. We are now going to review some of the questions that were submitted by the audience during the discussion and get into our Q&A section. Please remember to submit your questions during this time. So the first question we have for you guys, do you think the development speed, in particular the rise of CI/CD, containerism, and serverless architecture have increased these type of risks?
So I think it's a very good question. So I think it's Ohad. I think the CI/CD and the containers these days is technology that, on one hand, encapsulates anything that you have on production and allows developers to simulate how data or how the environment would look like in production, but you can do it locally, on any machine. So on one hand, it's supposed to minimize the risk. On the other hand, and we see it across the board on many companies that we work with, it gives you the confidence that things will be okay if you see them as okay locally, but then in production, different things happen. Things that, again, as we mentioned during the session, that are beyond your control. So many things, things that might look okay locally, in production, other things happen, and other third and fourth party vendors continue to change in production. So I think the proliferation of CI/CD technologies, on one hand, give you the confidence that things are more secure, but on the other hand, increase I think the chance that such leakage, data leakage would happen in production. So we become less and less careful because we assume that what we saw with all the mechanisms that we have, things are going to be okay.
I think it will vary on organization and what the processes are for the data to be consumed, and how the data is replicated in different environments. So if the same processes are followed across, no matter where the data is leveraged, right, to protect that information, whether it's for production or for development, I think that if the protection processes are followed across both environments, then the risk is the same as what you have today, right? But if you don't follow those processes, depending on the organization that you work for, obviously the risk is going to increase. So it's paying attention on where you're allowing for that information to be replicated and transferred to, and how you allow it to be transferred to, and how long do you allow it, right? That life cycle of that information. Do you have the right processes in place to allow for that information to be leveraged in a different environment?
Thank you, guys. So moving on to the next question. If a brand is tarnished by a data breach, what are the necessary steps the security team has to take in order to bring back a company's reputation?
That one's a really hard one to address, because once you've breached that trust, right, once you've made it out to the public that data was breached, it's really it's really hard to bring everybody back and say, you know what, we've done we've taken the proper steps to regain your trust. So from an organizational standpoint and from a corporate standpoint of view, I believe there has to be transparency, and to regain that trust on what approaches were taken by that organization on how to achieve, not necessarily giving in-depth details of what technology vendors you've used, but that you've taken the approach, right, that you are working on improving your data protection programs that you may have in your organization.
Great. Thank you, Anna. So it looks like we have time for just one more. So this is a good one to kind of wrap up the webinar. In your opinion, what are your predictions for the future of data hacking?
That's a very tough question, because that, in fact, data hacking has always increased over the last 2 decades. If you look at all the history of data hacking and data breaches that have taken place, and as more and more data flows, that will continue to grow, and so mitigating solutions need to keep up with them, and both from as I say from a consumer point of view as well as from industrial data point of view, these things remain a challenge for those who are trying to build solutions to mitigate the risk. And the size of hacking of the data breaches have increased. The frequencies are there. We all know about APTs that are there, and as more and more of these devices are deployed, and we know if we look from an IIoT point of view, then more and more devices will be deployed, both for consumer point of view and industrial point of view. Those will generate more opportunities for the hackers, and then the people who have to build the solutions to mitigate, they have to work harder.
While I see that definitely the attack surface is growing, and you build it, they will come. There will be more attacks. The one area I find some optimism is, when you look at the historical trend, is we are getting, as a technology industry, faster in our responses. My favorite example of this historically is the concept of a buffer overflow attack on a computer system was documented in '72. It was discussed in the '60s. We knew about it. The first really well-known exploit of that was in 1988, the Morris worm. So we had a good 14 years of when the exploit was identified and documented to actually develop countermeasures for it. And those initial documents did describe how to prevent someone from exploiting a buffer overrun. But the 80s, the rest of the 90s, and the turn of the millennium decade was dominated with exploits and injection attacks. We knew the whole time how to fix it. It's in the code at the very beginning. You basically check the user input before you use it. It took us 20 years to really make that less common. Nowadays, when an injection attack happens, it's typically a new set of code. Someone didn't do their due diligence and upfront, but the frequency of that particular vector is way down. And the next big response issue was, as I mentioned before, physical loss of property, lost laptops. Data was now mobile, and people could lose the mobile device. Well, we've pretty well solved that one by encrypting the data at rest. And that one took a couple of years to really roll out and implement. We're now dealing with other vectors, but I feel like the time from identifying the exploit to the time that it's actually the vectors used to exploit, that's gotten real short. People identify an exploit. We've got a whole dark web to distribute how to do it, how to take advantage of it. The time to respond to it is getting shorter. I can see not as short as the time that things are going from invention to exploit, but it is getting quicker. And I think we will continue to see that trend, that we'll be responding faster than we were in the past, because quite realistically, it's a low bar, how slow we responded to the first forms of technology hacking. But I do believe we are getting quicker. I acknowledge that the attack surface is getting bigger, and there's going to be more exploits in the future, but I feel we are responding quicker than we have in the past. It's been an improving trend.
Agreed. I think if we try to predict, obviously it's a hard task to predict where hackers would go, but I think when you try to predict where issues might happen, I think you should look at what are the areas and we mentioned complexity. What are the areas that complexity grows, and what are the areas that you have less visibility? Usually, these are the places where hackers. These are the areas that would be your weakest link. These are the areas where hackers would go. So the proliferation, as we mentioned, of third and fourth party vendors, something that you do not want to block, and you do not want to limit, and you cannot, and you don't want to. But these are the areas that you have less visibility, less control. These are the areas that you need to invest more resources to make sure that an issue doesn't start there. And also in terms of areas that you have less visibility are areas that you cannot check with your engineering teams inside your organization. These are the areas where you need to invest more resources to make sure that you see the full picture.
Great. Thank you, everyone. That was a great discussion. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic event. Thanks again to our awesome speakers, and I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Bye.